For the third straight season, the Edmonton Oilers and Los Angeles Kings will meet in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Joining me today on a very special Locked On crossover edition is Eddie Garcia of Locked On Kings. Let's get started.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings and Oilers fans, welcome to this special crossover edition of Locked On LA Kings and Locked On Oilers, both part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings, and he is Nick Zararis, pinch hitting as the host of Locked On Oilers. And we are here to talk about round 3 between the Los Angeles Kings and Edmonton Oilers in the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Face-off set for 7 p.m. tonight at Rogers Place in Edmonton. This episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, Nick, first off, nice to meet you. This is the first time we've had a chance to talk, but it's not the first time the Kings and Oilers have faced each other in the playoffs. 10th all-time meeting in the postseason, and of course, 3rd meeting in a row between these two teams. This is what the NHL wants, right? They've changed the setup of this so they can make rivalries, and there certainly is a pretty good rivalry going on right now between the Kings and the Oilers.
They got exactly what they wanted in this case. I don't know if any other case where it's worked out particularly well, maybe the Penguins and the Capitals last decade. But other than that, yeah, this is awesome. I mean, the two teams have had really interesting seasons, in all honesty, where the Kings came out of the gate really strong. They kind of hit a wall of late December, early January. They changed coaches. They got their stuff going again. Cam Talbot had himself a nice season. The Oilers changed coaches very early on, like the second or third week of November, and they've played at 118-point pace since changing coaches. So really interesting seasons. And the fact they're meeting each other again, it's kind of poetic. You know, they changed coaches. There's been a lot of turnover on the rosters over the last couple of seasons. The Kings kind of finding a way to get over the hump, and the Oilers trying to find the exact right recipe of guys to be the supporting cast.
Well, the Oilers finished second in the Pacific Division, record of 49-27-6 for 104 points. As you mentioned, things didn't start off well, but they certainly did change after Jay Woodcroft was let go and Chris Knobloch came in, and the Oilers went on a winning streak of 16 games in a row to set the stage for them getting back to the playoffs for a 5th straight year. And as you mentioned, the Kings, a little bit of an opposite start. They were strong right out of the gate, 16-4-3. They even had an NHL record 11-game road winning streak to start the season, then hit a mid to late season slump that saw them make the coaching change. Todd McClellan let go. Jim Hiller takes in, the assistant coach promoted. Things stabilized for the Kings, and they're in the playoffs for a 3rd straight season. So, all right, Nick, you're up first. What is the biggest storyline for the Edmonton Oilers coming into this playoff series?
Where's the secondary scoring going to come from? There's no qualms. Draisaitl and McDavid are going to record their points. They've got 44 points in 13 playoff games against the Kings over the last 2 years. But it's a lot harder when all of your goal scoring is coming from one line. When they play McDavid and Draisaitl together, it really makes it where someone else is going to have to contribute, whether that's Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, whether that's Zach Hyman. Hyman didn't have a great playoffs last year. Nugent-Hopkins has been really cold down the stretch of the regular season here. Maybe it's someone further down the lineup. Maybe it's a Corey Perry. Maybe it's an Adam Henrique. If Evander Kane is healthy, which the Oilers haven't indicated if he's going to be able to go, but it's going to have to be someone other than the big two contributing offensively, because the Kings are strong enough defensively and they have enough depth where they'll probably win a good majority of those bottom 6 shifts because of the depth they have in their forward group. So the Oilers are going to have to find a little bit more offense from somebody that's not 29 or 97.
Well, the biggest storyline for the LA Kings is now or never, at least for this version of the LA Kings. They come in pretty much completely healthy, something that wasn't the case in 2022 or 2023. 2 years ago, they were missing Victor Arvidsson. Last year, Kevin Fiala and former King Gabe Vilardi missed the start of the season. So no excuses or worries health-wise, at least to start the series. The Kings' biggest weakness against the Oilers was their penalty kill last year. That's been greatly improved. I'll talk more about that as far as stats a little bit later. So it seems this Kings team is probably stronger than the last 2 seasons, but that's not what I really mean when I say now or never. And not just because of the 3 straight years against Edmonton. Bigger picture, the biggest storyline for the Kings is what happens if they lose again to Edmonton. If the Kings lose to the Oilers for a 3rd straight year, if the Kings don't show any progress from the last 3 postseasons, there will be major changes, I believe. And that includes a new general manager and obviously a new head coach. Team president Luc Robitaille, GM Rob Blake, and at the time head coach Todd McClellan all made it very clear going into this season that just making the playoffs was not enough. This team was built, made roster additions, and spent money to not just make the playoffs, but to advance in the playoffs. If the Kings don't advance out of the first round, I believe GM Rob Blake will be fired. There's no doubt there'll be a new head coach next year as interim coach Jim Hiller will be gone. And obviously, when you make a GM and head coaching change, that can have huge repercussions on what the philosophy of the team is going to be going forward. New GM wants to put his stamp on the team as far as the roster and, of course, who he brings in as head coach and what that person's style and philosophy is. So there's a lot more on the line for the LA Kings than just winning a first-round playoff series. Now, believe it or not, I don't think that this adds any extra pressure on the players themselves. I think as far as the players are concerned, they just want to beat the Oilers to avoid the embarrassment of 3 straight years losing to the same team. But certainly there is extra pressure on head coach Jim Hiller, who's never been a head coach in the NHL playoffs before. Of course, same goes for the Oilers and Chris Knobloch. What adjustments is he going to make? What moves will he make? What's the lineup going to look like? He has not been shy about changing things around either during a game or from game to game, even going from, the 12 forwards, 6 defense to 11 forwards, 7 defense, which I know the Oilers have done against the Kings in the past. But again, the biggest storyline for the LA Kings, win the series, or there will be some pretty big changes come next season. Up next, we're going to discuss key players to watch as the Oilers and Kings go at it again in the Stanley Cup playoffs. That's next here on Locked on LA Kings, your team every day.
We are fully in the swing of things. The playoffs are rolling in both the NBA and the NHL. It was a great weekend to be a sports fan. And FanDuel is your place to get in on the action in every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs. Don't forget, we still got baseball going on during the hockey and the basketball playoffs. All on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And by our friends over at Policygenius. Life insurance is one of the most important responsibilities you have as a provider. When it comes to making sure your family is safe, look out for Policygenius. You can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. Policygenius helps you compare your options from all of the top companies, and their team of licensed experts are on hand to help walk you through it every step of the way. Easily compare quotes from all of America's top insurers in just a few clicks to find your lowest price. Your work life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family's needs, and even worse, if you switch jobs, it might not come with you. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonnhl or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockedonnhl.
We continue our LA Kings Edmonton Oilers crossover special. Game 1 of the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs coming up tonight. I'm Eddie Garcia, host of Locked on LA Kings. He is Nick Zararis, the host of Locked on Oilers. All right, Nick, I think I know the answer to this, but I will pose the question to you. Some key players for the Edmonton Oilers in this series against the LA Kings.
So for the purposes of being informative, we'll stay away from McDavid and Draisaitl. Everybody's aware of how good they are. The key for this series is going to be the supporting cast. In my opinion, I think the most important lineup decision and the most important player in this series for the Oilers is going to be how Knobloch opts to use the pair of Evan Bouchard and Matthias Ekholm. There have been points this season where basically when they weren't on the ice, the Oilers defense was wholly ineffective, whether it's Darnell Nurse, whether it's Cody Ceci, whether it's Vincent Desharnais. They've auditioned and rotated in and out a lot of defensemen across the bottom two pairs. And for the purposes of this series, which I imagine if the Oilers are going to have a hard time, it's going to be because the Kings muck it up, slow it down, really lean on the forecheck, and really try to slow the Oilers down physically from using their speed. So if Bouchard and Ekholm are separated from Draisaitl and McDavid for large stretches of the game, they can kind of diversify how they're going to approach it. In an ideal world for the Oilers, if they're going to win this series relatively cleanly, they would want to have at least one of McDavid, Draisaitl, or Bouchard on the ice for a good chunk of the game. If they can separate at least two from the third guy, that gives them reasonable control of the game for 30 to 35 minutes. And then it becomes a lot more palatable. Okay, if we only need to digest 25 more minutes of the game, probably 5 to 10 of those 25 minutes are going to be on special teams. So that's not as much of a lineup consideration. So then we're only down 10, 15 minutes of the game we're going to have to manage without one of those guys on the ice. And for Bouchard, he's never really played this much before. This is kind of his coming out party. He's had flashes of being a good player at the NHL level, but this is the first season where he's really put it all together. And he's forced the Oilers' hand where they slow played his development. He wasn't given a ton of opportunity to progress up the depth chart early on in his career. But now he's their most important defenseman, and paired with Ekholm, who's one of the most underrated players in the entire league. He's undoubtedly the Oilers' best defensive defenseman, one of the best defensive defensemen in the entire league. What can the Oilers do to mitigate that grind it out, slow it down style that the Kings run effectively? I know everybody, the buzzword going into the playoffs has been 1-3-1. Everybody suddenly understands tactics and depth. Everybody suddenly understands hockey tactics because a few people brought it up. The Oilers are going to use their speed. They're going to try and break through that. But for them to do that, it's going to require their defensemen to be able to move the puck away from danger, to skate the puck out of danger. And when the Kings forecheck is going, they're pretty fast. They're a pretty annoying team to play against. So what are the Oilers going to do in the non-Bouchard and Ekholm minutes is largely going to determine how this series goes.
Well, the key players for the LA Kings, I think you have to start in net. The Kings will have their third different goalie to face the Oilers in the playoffs. 2 years ago was Jonathan Quick. Last season it was trade deadline pickup Jonas Korpisalo. And now former Oiler Cam Talbot, and he has had an up and down season for LA, kind of like the team. Started off amazing, 14-8-3, ended up being named an all-star, but then kind of like the team, had a slump, saw him lose 11 straight and briefly lose his starting job, but he has rebounded like the team after the coaching change. He has a 2.50 goals against average and a .913 save percentage, which is better than Stuart Skinner. But moreover, Cam Talbot has been waiting 2 years for this opportunity. 2 years ago, he was with the Minnesota Wild, had a very solid season, only to be replaced in the playoffs by trade deadline pickup and future Hall of Famer Marc-Andre Fleury. He was so upset about that he demanded a trade out of Minnesota, and he got his wish. They shipped him off to the Ottawa Senators. Obviously, didn't get a shot at the playoffs last season, but now he gets his shot to show what he can do in postseason play, something he kind of felt he was robbed of couple seasons ago. Plus, it also doesn't hurt. He's a UFA after this season. Good showing in the playoffs certainly would help him get a better contract for next season. So Cam Talbot motivated on many levels for playoff hockey. As for the skaters, most Oilers fans will know obviously about Anze Kopitar, Drew Doughty, Adrian Kempe, Kevin Fiala, Victor Arvidsson. But I'm going to give you a couple of names that maybe you're not quite as familiar with, and that would be Quentin Byfield and Trevor Moore. Now, Byfield was the number 2 overall pick in 2020, so fans might know his name. But he had a breakout season this year. 20 goals, including some highlight reel goals, 55 points, far and away career numbers for him this year. Took a big leap in his development, and they're hoping he can do the same going forward, that he's just now scratching the surface. He did have a 19-game goalless streak just come to an end in the regular season finale. Finally got that 20th goal, kind of got the monkey off his back, even got a nice little incentive bonus for that as well. So I think that was big for him to get off the schneid, get that goal, feel good about himself going into the playoffs. And I think they're going to need some production from him to make the depth that you talked about pay off for them in this series. And Trevor Moore is a guy who, kind of not a bit of a journeyman, started his career with Toronto, came over in a trade, and he had a breakout year with 31 goals, career high for him, led the team in goals. His previous career high was 17. So he's also a part of the Kings' most dangerous line, which is their second line, along with Victor Arvidsson and Philip Deneau. So, like I said, the other players, the names you're a little bit more familiar with, more of the veteran forwards for the LA Kings, those guys should all be productive enough, but I think it's going to take a little bit more, obviously, to offset what McDavid and Draisaitl can do and what the depth is from Edmonton. A little bit more balance scoring for the LA Kings. If they can get Trevor Moore and Quentin Byfield to contribute as well, I think that'll go a long way in the Kings being able to win this series.
I do have a question for you about that.
Absolutely, please.
So I was reading something about the Kings the other day, and they've really kind of tinkered around where they've kind of had everybody play with everybody a little bit this season. In your estimation, what's been the best permutation of their top nine? Because I've seen they've really tried everything to get Dubois going, and it's not entirely on him, but it's mostly on him. What, in your estimation, has been their best combination of forwards? Because they have so many guys. They are one of the deepest forward groups in the entire NHL.
I think I mentioned the second line. I think Kopitar and Kempe on the top line with Quentin Byfield is the better option. Lately, they've gone away from that. They actually moved Byfield down on the fourth line with Pierre-Luc Dubois. I think it's something they did later in the year. I don't know if it was just to shake it up a bit. And you mentioned, especially after the coaching change, Jim Miller has not been shy about really tinkering with things. So you're right. But I think for Pierre-Luc Dubois, coming into the season, I thought he was going to be the team's second line center. I thought Philip Deneau would slide down to the third line center, and that didn't happen all year. And Deneau's a great all-around player, not flashy, but really on both ends of the ice gets it done. And I get that. But Dubois has proven to me that he only plays well when he plays with better players. He's not a guy who's kind of a self-driving player, so to speak. And to his defense, he's been paired with rookies and role players throughout most of the season, and that hasn't worked out. It's been part of his problem, not the entire problem. He definitely needs to be at least on the third line. The fourth line, to me, I might as well maybe play somebody else, to be totally honest with you. So, and that we're talking about X factors coming up here in a second. I think we'll repeat that name here in just a second. But we've got X factors. We've got maybe some stats to throw out at you. I don't know, Nick, if you're an analytics guy or not. I'm not, but they are interesting. And if you know more about that, then maybe that's something you could share. And of course, we'll make our predictions as well. That's coming up next here on Locked on LA Kings, your team every day.
If you're like me, you like going to do things. You like going to games, concerts, comedy shows, maybe a play. And that's why you need to check in with our friends over at Game Time. The app features so many useful things. Number one, it shows a digital rendering of what the view of whatever you're going to looks like from your seat. It includes all-in pricing, so there's no surprise $50 or $60 of fees when you get to the final screen that jack up the total price. And it has cool things like flash deals, zone deals, which are deals that come up right before the game starts. So if you're in the area, you might be able to make something happen spur of the moment. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
We are wrapping up our Kings Oilers special crossover episode. Of course, first round of the playoffs, Kings and Oilers are meeting once again. I'm Eddie Garcia. He is Nick Zararis. Nick, any notable stats that you have to share with us regarding the Edmonton Oilers?
So you heard me talk about in the last segment that Bouchard and Ekholm are their most important defensive pair. And the stat I think that best illustrates that is the goal differential for when they're on the ice versus the other defensive pairs. They have really done a nice job when they are on the ice of controlling large stretches of play. When things are going well for them, those two are on the ice with at least one of McDavid and Draisaitl, and they control the game. We're talking 60, 70% of the scoring chances, 60, 70% of the expected goals, and about 60% of the actual goals. If I remember correctly, their goal differential at even strength is something in the ballpark of 65 to 33, where they are effectively outscoring the other team 2-1 when Bouchard and Ekholm are on the ice. And then you add McDavid or Draisaitl or both to that, and you're really talking about one of the most dominant combinations of forwards overall. And you heard me mention it before in the first segment, and something I think that bears out being interesting is the idea that if you get at least a point per game from McDavid and Draisaitl, which we should address that. That's ridiculous. The expectation for both of those guys is they're going to have at least a point per game, if not two. They've averaged about 2 points per game when these teams have played in the postseason the last couple of years. But when those guys aren't on the ice, where is the offense going to come from? And I had mentioned Nugent-Hopkins only having one goal from the end of March through the end of the regular season. Evander Kane hasn't played. But the one other stat I wanted to touch on, I didn't mention the Oilers goaltending situation. You mentioned Talbot's had a really strong season. Talbot's got one of the better playoff track records of all of the goalies in the playoffs, which I was very surprised when I was doing my research. He's got, I think, the third or fourth best save percentage of all the goalies going into the playoffs in the playoffs previously. But when we talk about Stuart Skinner, 890 save percentage last year. The year before that, he wasn't the starter. So for the Oilers, they don't even need Stuart Skinner to be good. They just need him to not be atrocious. If he's around league average, the Oilers will be in okay shape. But if he's like he was last year, where they have to go to Jack Campbell or Calvin Pickard or a fourth goalie who they may or may not have to call up, that's where the series can start to get hairy. And one other thing I noted, the Kings have won game one in this series, both of the previous two times they've played. And from that, the series have kind of evolved. 2 years ago, the games got weird, where it's like 6-2 and then like 8-1. And then the Kings blew out the Oilers. And then last year, it was a lot closer. It was a lot more congested. But still, the Oilers managed to pull away. So the one last stat and the one last thing I wanted to touch on before I throw it back over to you, can the Oilers find a way to make their offense go when the first line guys aren't out there, whether it's Warren Fogle, Ryan McLeod, Dylan Holloway, Connor Brown, Corey Perry, Evander Kane? Some of those guys are going to have to win those minutes. You mentioned Dubois, you mentioned Byfield. The Kings have enough depth where they should win a good chunk of the minutes against the Oilers' bottom six guys. That's kind of, for me, the series, what's going to determine this series. If the Kings are going to win this series, which they absolutely can, it's going to be because they destroy the Oilers in those minutes when Draisaitl and McDavid aren't on the ice. That third line the Kings have the potential of rolling out there is one of the best third lines in the entire playoffs if everybody's right on that line and going well. And this is a team that, as you mentioned, features Fiala, who's a 40-goal guy a couple times, Kempe, who's been a 30-goal guy a couple times, Moore, who you mentioned, hit the 30-goal mark this year. The Kings have a lot of goal scoring throughout their lineup. The Oilers don't really once you get past their first 4 or 5 guys. So the piecemeal approach versus the throughout the entire lineup approach, it's going to be a really interesting battle. And this is a question I should have asked in the last segment, but I can throw it off of this. Are they going to use Deneau as kind of their McDavid guy? Because he's had decent success doing that in the last 2 postseasons. It's just you can't get him out there every single shift against him because it's just not feasible.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the plan. I imagine Mikey Anderson will try and be on the ice as well, who's been familiar with Connor McDavid as well. So, yeah, I think Philip Deneau will try and get the assignment as much as possible. As far as the staff of the Kings, I would say 84.6%, which is the Kings' penalty kill this season. Second best in the NHL. It was first for most of the year, but the Hurricanes passed them late in the season. Now, last year when the Kings faced the Oilers, the penalty kill which finished 24th in the league, was at 75.8%. So obviously a huge improvement. It was the big focus in the offseason. It was addressed. And so now hopefully the Kings can take what they've done on the PK from the regular season into the postseason. Obviously, the Oilers power play is not quite as big of a juggernaut as it was a year ago, but still very good, fourth in the NHL. So the Kings penalty kill, how much has it improved from one postseason to the next? It was great in the regular season. They got to translate that over into the postseason. So the penalty kill percentage of the LA Kings in the postseason, obviously going to be a big stat to watch for them. Nick, how about some X factors for the Edmonton Oilers?
I think it's Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. He's had a pretty meh season this year. He had as many points this year as he had assists last year. Some of that, mitigated because Zach Hyman, 50 goals. When you have a guy score 50 goals, you're going to lose opportunities to score, and that's fair. But when the Oilers have been dangerous in the postseason, it's when Nugent-Hopkins has been one of their more effective players. And when the Oilers are chasing a goal, that's great that they can go with Nuge, Hyman, Draisaitl, McDavid, Bouchard. That's arguably the best five-man unit you can run in the entire NHL. But when he's away from those guys, is he going to be able to help manufacture some offense with a Connor Brown, with a Corey Perry, if Evander Kane plays? That's kind of the key for me. If Nugent-Hopkins can, he doesn't even need to drive the line, but at least be a contributor on a secondary line, that I think will really, really help my main concern, which is the lack of goal scoring depth. Because when Nugent-Hopkins is right, I mean, this is a guy who had 100-something points last year. When he's on, he's a really creative playmaker and really able to set guys up. And in a vacuum, if you have him with Connor Brown and then one of the other net front guys, whether it's Perry, whether it's Kane, who's inclined to mix it up with that defenseman, screen the goalie, that's when they can really be dangerous. So for me, the Oilers' X factor, it has to be Nugent-Hopkins, because you just expect Draisaitl and McDavid to do what they need to do.
And for the Kings, it's somebody we just mentioned. It's Pierre-Luc Dubois. Way off his career averages this season with 16 goals and 40 points. I mentioned played on the third line for the great majority of the season. He was brought in to make a difference for the Kings. It was thought that making this team stronger down the middle could be a difference in a playoff series, specifically against the Edmonton Oilers. Now, based on his regular season, it's hard for me to believe that that's going to be the case. But if it is, he could definitely be the X factor for the LA Kings. He can take away a lot of the stink that he's had this season amongst Kings fans who have been very disappointed with his play. I have mentioned, I think there are some legitimate excuses for why his production has fallen off. Not being a top 6 forward certainly would be very high on the list, playing with rookies and role players for most of the season as well. But there's no doubt that a lot of times this year he has not passed the eye test. He has not looked like he's put in the effort necessary. Now, you would think in playoff hockey, that'll take care of itself. If it does and he can be productive, I think Pierre-Luc Dubois could be a huge X factor in this series. And also an X factor, I think, for the Kings team-wise, their power play, it's not as good as it was last year. I think if they're going to stack up against the Kings special teams-wise, they need to get something out of their power play as well. And the return of Victor Arvidsson late in the year, because he missed most of the year with a back injury, I think that certainly has helped them later in the year to have the power play be better. So I think special teams will be a big key for the LA Kings. All right, Nick, it is prediction time. Who do you think will win the series, and how many games between the LA Kings and the Edmonton Oilers in round 3?
I am picking the Oilers in 6. I feel these teams are closer than they've been the last 2 seasons. Part of the regular season going a little weird for both of them, frankly, leads me to believe that this is one of those series where if someone gets a little hot, whether it's a goalie or a skater, I really feel they could swing the series. Whichever player that is on which team, if it's not one of the stars on the Oilers, I can see a world where Kevin Fiala pots 6 goals in 7 games and the Kings win 2 in overtime. And maybe we're having this conversation 10 days from now going into a game 6 or 7. I think the Oilers have just a little bit more high-end talent, and that high-end talent head-to-head against the Kings' high-end talent, that's what swung the series the previous 2 times. I think that'll be the case again.
Nick, have you heard the term third time is the charm? Of course you have. It's been around since the 1800s. It's historical. I think the Oilers are sick of playing the Kings. I think that they've thought we've done this 2 years in a row. We've seen this movie before. They've got bigger fish to fry. They're thinking Stanley Cup, right? They're not thinking first round of the playoffs. For the LA Kings, honestly, their whole focus all year has just been win the first series, get past the first round. They've got the Oilers again. They're hungry to beat Edmonton. Third time's the charm. Kings in 7. That's going to do it for our crossover special, looking at the first round playoff series between the LA Kings and Edmonton Oilers. Keep up to date on both the LA Kings and Edmonton Oilers. Check out Locked on LA Kings and Locked on Oilers, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube. Nick, it was great to meet you. Great job. I love the insight. I'll definitely be thinking about what you had to say on this show as we watch the series. I won't say good luck because I wouldn't mean it, but I will say may the best team win, and I honestly do hope it is a great series. He is Nick Zararis. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching this crossover episode of Locked on Oilers and Locked on Kings, part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day. Have a great day and enjoy the Stanley Cup playoffs.